Today's presentation is called Total Mountain. I have a series of books coming out. As you can see, I'm wearing my Strong First shirt for this presentation. I come out of the Strong First kettlebell and bodyweight training and programming. Tonight's presentation is about minimalist fitness programming for both busy professionals and athletes. And I lump those two together, even though at first blush they may seem that they're opposite. But both professionals, whether they're running a startup, they're an executive or a manager, or any kind of an athlete, are trying to have their ultimate performance, and they don't have a lot of time for anything other than what they're doing. So an athlete's trying to compete in their sport, and they're probably very specifically training in one way. And there may be other things that might benefit them, like some more mobility or conditioning or what have you. But quite often they just want to do their thing and they don't want to spend time doing anything else. Just like professionals are quite often spending all day at the office or they're burning the midnight oil, they probably would do better to think about recovery and training and getting some fitness and some fresh air and exercise, but really they don't have the time to spare. So creating some kind of a minimalist program that gives them the biggest bang for the buck is something that might be helpful for both groups of people to have the best performance they can possibly have. So who am I and why have I created this? Well, I have been a mountain athlete for almost my entire life. So I have over 30 years of climbing and mountain experience. This picture is for me on the nose on El Cap, which is probably the most famous big wall climb in the world. And through guiding and rescue and being a mountain athlete, I've learned a lot of things that work and don't work for strength and conditioning. I also have a lot of police and military background in teaching and training. I'm currently an ICF certified coach, so I'm predominantly a life coach now, but as I said, I have lots of time teaching in universities, colleges, climbing gyms, regular kind of, fitness gyms, with fitness classes of all kinds. So kind of bringing all of that together, both the physical training and like the life coaching, has helped me to kind of hone this Total Mountain program. Today, we're going to talk about what fitness is and isn't. We're going to go over the basic human movements, not only what they are, but how they work both in a training or athletic kind of arena, as well as in your daily life. We're going to talk about training itself and different components of training and how to use training most effectively. We're also going to talk about recovery and how important it is and what you may want to add or subtract from your life to recover better. And then we're going to review some of these things. So what is fitness? Fitness is all kinds of things. It's not a binary system. It's not that you're fit or you are not. So fitness is really dependent on you and your goals and where you are in your life. As a side note, I didn't want to use any stock imagery or imagery I didn't have permission to use. So most of the pictures you're going to see are of me. So I apologize for all the Shane-ness that you're going to see in this presentation. But this is a specific kind of fitness. You'll see this picture is of me doing a pistol, which is a one-legged body weight squat. So if you're a strength athlete, it may not really be of importance for you to do this kind of movement because you're only using your body weight. It's a lot of balance, it's a lot of mobility, it's a lot of flexibility. So for me as an outdoor athlete where I'm using my body, this is the type of fitness and training that is applicable to me. But if you're a football player, for instance, and you want to be big and you want to be strong and you want to have a lot of power and a lot of quickness, doing something like this may not benefit your fitness. So what is fitness? For me, fitness isn't so much a measurement of a certain exercise, like if you bench a certain amount of weight, you're fit, and if you can't, you're not. Or if you can run a certain distance in a certain time, you're fit, and if you can't, you're not. It's more along the lines of subjective, relative, individual, fluid, and endless. I chose this picture to kind of represent what fitness is because this is my friend Tom and I in Yosemite. And at the time, I was in my late 30s and he was almost 60. So he was a lot older than I am. We're about the same height, about the same build, but we could both go climbing and hiking in Yosemite for 2 weeks together, even though he was a third or almost half as old as I was. Now, I was quite a bit stronger than he was, but he had tons more conditioning. So every time we hiked in somewhere, he was always way ahead of me, but I could climb harder than he was. So we were both fit as climbers, and both fit as backpackers and hikers, but we still had that individual levels of fitness of being kind of ahead or behind each other, depending. So to go further into subjective, this is another Yosemite trip. My buddy Jeff and I, you can see Half Dome behind us, who are both climbers. And the question is, which one of us is fit? So again, we're kind of similar heights, but obviously our builds are very different. He's a lot stockier than I am. He has much wider shoulders and hips. He's got a bit of a belly, but he's super strong. He comes from a background like I did. We actually met in high school on the track and cross country team. So we both used to run, but he then went into basically strength and power and weight training. And so he's super strong. He has tons of power. And I predominantly do body weight exercises, and I'm a lot leaner and smaller than he is, but we still can both go climbing and hiking and even do it together. So it's not so much that one of us is a fit climber and the other isn't. It's we're both fit, just in different ways. So again, trying to think of fitness not in a binary yes or no way, but in a what works for me way. Fitness is relative, which there's a pun here because this is my brother, so he's literally my relative, but he does CrossFit. And so he's a lot younger than I am. He's a lot heavier than I am. He looks like a power lifter. He's quite a bit shorter than I am, but he's way stronger than I am. His fitness is relative to his community. The CrossFit community, quite often, like they call it a box instead of a gym. So he goes to the box every day and he trains with predominantly the same people every time. So his fitness is relative to not only his performance in CrossFit, because they measure everything so he knows where he's at and is he improving in this or not. So it's relative to his own performance, but it's also relative to the other people, or comparative to the other people in his individual CrossFit box. You know, based on the other guys or the other girls that are here, how does my fitness rank as opposed to them? But also it's relative to CrossFit as a whole. So in comparison to the ideal version of doing walking handstands, for instance, is his ability to do it good or not relative to the standard? Now, I don't do CrossFit, so I don't relate any of my standards of fitness to anything that they do because it doesn't apply to me. So one of the other things to think about is, especially in social media, we see pictures of these people, or we see people competing on fields and sports and things. Quite often we fall into the trap of thinking that we are or aren't fit based on what those other people are doing, but it may not relate to us in any way. So kind of learning what does and doesn't relate to you might be very helpful in helping you understand, like, how fit are you actually, and is something someone else is doing going to actually be a good goal for you to pursue or not. Fitness is also individual. So kind of like dealing with the relative thing, as opposed to thinking of comparing yourself to others, it's quite often better to think of comparing yourself to other versions of yourself. So this is a picture from me about 5 or 6 years ago. And at the time I felt like I was pretty fit, but when I look back on it, I feel now that I wasn't. I was very conditioned, so I could put a pack on and kind of hike all day, but I was still dealing with some residual shoulder injuries, and I wasn't very strong. I wasn't very flexible or mobile, and I was quite a bit thicker and heavier than I am now. As opposed to, this is from last summer, I'm much leaner and much stronger, but I was not doing any conditioning. I couldn't carry a pack, and I didn't have like the general fitness, so to speak, of being able to go all day like I was in the previous picture. So I was much happier in the movement I had in my fitness from that first picture 5 years ago to now. And so I feel fitter now, but it's me comparing myself to myself as opposed to comparing myself to others. But again, that was a fluid thing. So my fitness has changed over time, and it's going to continue to change. And rather than look at myself as a failure or a success, to step back and say, I'm going to allow my fitness to change over time because I'm going to change over time. And as long as I remain fit in whatever works for me, I am fit as opposed to I was fit. And that leads me to the pursuit of fitness. For me, I'm an athlete. I've been an athlete since I was in high school. Training and being athletic and being physically fit is a part of my life. So this is a picture of me doing some get-ups on our patio Monday morning. So I get up and I train three mornings a week because that's part of my routine. I like to do that. It makes me feel good. And it's something I've done for a long time, and I'm going to continue to do it. So rather than think in terms of these big life goals, a lot of times people will say, oh, I want to run a marathon, and they'll put running into their life, and they'll build themselves up for a few weeks or months, and they'll have that big event. And then for the rest of their lives, they'll be able to say, I ran a marathon once. Well, that's great, but you can't sit on the couch for 20 years and say, I'm fit because I ran a marathon once. Fitness is something that becomes a part of your life, and it can really improve your life. So again, thinking in terms of individualizing your fitness, making goals that are specific to you, comparing yourself to yourself as opposed to other people, and understanding that it's kind of a lifestyle shift and change. That is more, I feel, a better way to look at fitness than some kind of arbitrary number or comparing yourself to other people. And again, feel free to jump in if anyone has any questions or they'd like to have any specifics or dive deeper into anything. Otherwise, I'll just keep going.
I thought it was really helpful when you were showing the two photographs and contrasting what was basically kind of strength versus conditioning, and how you may have been heavier, but your conditioning was better, and then you got leaner, and your strength was better.
Yeah, and actually, so yes, in this picture in particular, like my wife and I were on a 2-week trip, and I thought of it initially as like a climbing trip, but really it was like a backpacking trip, because we would spend a day kind of driving to a national park, and we'd hike around that afternoon. And the next day we would, like on this day, we spent like 2 hours hiking into that climb. And I think we climbed the first, it was like 5 pitches. We climbed the first half. And then I was like, I just can't do anymore because I was worn out. But I still was able to then come down and hike all the way out like it was nothing. So again, I was plenty fit enough to carry a pack and hike all day, but I was not strong enough to do the climb. So again, 2 different kinds of fitness. So the second main thing I want to talk about is the 6 basic human movements. And depending on what you look at or where you're reading, you may see a different number of these, but I come from the Strong First world. Again, I have their shirt on today, and they have this list, which is both applicable to all sports, but also to all your aspects of life. And that's why they call it the basic human movements, because this makes up all the movements we do in our day. And they are the push, the pull, the squat, the hinge, the carry, and the rotation. So again, we'll kind of go into each one of those. And most of these are going to be familiar. A push, most people will think like a bench press. And again, I'm doing one with kettlebells here. This is what they call a floor press, but again, it's basically a bench press. You could do it with no equipment, and that's like a push-up, for instance. There's all different kinds of that. And in a sports application, you're probably not going to be pushing someone away from you unless you're like wrestling, MMA, maybe some kinds of martial arts where you're trying to push your opponent away, or like football where you're on the line and you're trying to push the other person away. But we use it all the time in our daily tasks. We're pushing the lawnmower, we're pushing the shopping cart, we're pushing the stroller, we're pushing furniture across the room, or anything like that. So anything dealing with kind of the front of the torso, it could be a push in front of you, it could be pushing something overhead. A lot of times that's called a press, but it's still considered a push. Anything like that, those apply to sports and our daily lives. Then the opposite is the pull. So that's the back. So again, here I'm doing a pull-up. So that's considered a body weight motion. It could be a bent over row if you have barbells, or any kind of exercise where you're using your back and pulling. And again, you can do that in every kind of sport where you're pulling someone or pulling something, especially if you're doing like a tug of war or something is a great example where you're pulling. But also in daily life, quite often if you're starting the lawnmower, you have to pull the cord hard enough and fast enough in order to get that engine to kick in. You're pulling doors open, you're sliding doors closed, you're, you know, again, pulling chairs out, you're pulling all the time. And it doesn't need to be heavy. It's still a fundamental basic movement. Next is the squat. And I'm going to compare the squat to the hinge because a lot of people don't know the difference. They may be familiar with the squat as an exercise, which here I'm doing it with kettlebells. Again, you could do it with barbells. CrossFit has made the front squat much more popular, where you're squatting with a barbell or kettlebells in front of you as opposed to on your back. But regardless, the squat is the hips going down and ideally going below the knees. So CrossFit, again, I reference it a lot because my brother and I talk a lot about it since he does it. In CrossFit, they call it an ass to grass squat. So again, dropping your hips as low as you possibly can. But again, it's a fundamental movement. So anytime you're sitting down on anything or standing up from anything, that is a squat movement. A lot of times people are gonna pick stuff up by getting into a squat, or you're gonna have to squat down to get under something or what have you. So the more you can work on these fundamental movements, regardless of whether you're using weights or not, the better they're gonna carry over into your daily life and being able to do these regardless of whether it has a sports performance or not. So to contrast the squat, we have the hinge. Now the difference is in the squat, as I said, the hips go down and they go ideally below the knees. Well, in the hinge, the hips go back and they stay above the knees. So most people, when they think of a hinge, they'll think of like a deadlift or something like that. And there's all kinds of ways to do deadlifts, whether you're using a barbell or not, 2 legs, 1 leg, what have you. But, and I know James will know this, but also doing things like the kettlebell swing or a clean or a snatch, all of those are a big hip thrust movement. And hip thrusts or hinge positions, especially like in things like football or even sprinting, an athletic stance where you're kind of bringing your hips back, or people who are getting ready to catch a ball, like in the outfield, they'll get into that like wide feet, hips back so they can, you know, spring up and jump themselves into a fast run. That is a hinge movement. Quite often, like if you're gonna move a couch or you're gonna pick a heavy box up, you're gonna bring your hips back in order to get yourself down to pick that up. So it's very applicable for picking up heavy objects from the floor, again, regardless of whether it's a barbell or it's a piece of furniture that you need to move. So the last two are gonna be quite a bit less common. Dan John, who is an Olympic athlete, he is a world-renowned strength coach. He works with Olympians. He works with a lot of professional teams. He's one of the best-known strength coaches in the world and has been since the 70s. He's predominantly an Olympic thrower and a track athlete. He puts carries at the #1 exercise for total body strength and conditioning over any other, to include squats or deadlifts or anything, because they're so applicable not only to every single sport, but to every human movement. So most people at some point, they're gonna be carrying babies, they're gonna be carrying groceries, they're gonna be carrying backpacks, they're gonna be carrying, again, you know, we just moved, so I keep referencing moving furniture. You're gonna pick up a chair and bring it across the room. Anytime you eat something, you pick it up and you carry it. Again, it doesn't matter how heavy these things are, we're doing these things because they're basic human movements. They're gonna do them all day, every day in all these ways. And learning how to do things like carries, I mean, have you ever seen kids, they take their book bag and it's all full of tons of stuff and they put it over one shoulder and then they're walking around like this all the time because they think it's cool to have it only on one strap, but they're not carrying it in a safe manner. They're hunching their back and they're twisting. So learning how to do things with good structure, especially with like weights, it's really easy to just pick up anything that has some weight in it and learn how to carry them properly, will cross over not only to sport, but again, in real life. So learning how to bend yourself down, whether it's bending your knees or bending at the waist or hinging or whatever it is, and picking something up without injuring yourself. You know, how many people know someone who's like, oh, I tweaked my back, I went to pick up the thing and I hurt myself. So learning how to do carries properly will serve you well. Again, it doesn't matter if it's a sports connotation or not. We don't want someone to end up on the couch for 6 weeks because they pulled their back because they didn't know how to carry something properly. And then the last one, which is probably the least well known, is rotation. So again, doing one armed or one leg movements, here I have a weight in one side. So I was going to be doing a one-armed carry, basically. So learning how to walk with a weight in one hand, and again, just like those kids with the backpack, I'm not going to be moving over because I have weight in one hand and I don't have it in the other. I'm going to keep myself balanced and braced. So it doesn't matter how much weight I have in one hand or the other, if the weights don't match or whatever. I'm learning how to move without twisting or rotating. And the reason that's so important is learning how to resist those rotations and movements enable us to rotate and move when we want to. And every single sport has a rotation. It doesn't matter if you're doing a backhand in tennis, you're swinging a baseball bat, you're swinging a golf club, or you're simply throwing or catching a ball. Pretty much every single sport involves one of those movements, and every single one of those is a rotation. Think of just boxing or any kind of fight sport. You're going to spin or twist your hips really fast in order to rotate your body so that that blow can come out. Or the opposite, if you're going to block, you need to turn and rotate your hips, you need to turn and rotate your shoulders. So all that comes from the mobility and flexibility of being able to move well, but also of building up this rotation so that you can protect your body from injury as well as have that movement pattern established. So again, sports application, real life application. So that's a quick kind of overview of all the basic human movements and how they can apply to your life, both in sport and non-sport context. So to get into a little bit more about training itself, I'm going to talk about cycles and why having cycles or a plan might be more beneficial to you. I'm going to talk about training to success as opposed to training to failure, and how building the skill is quite often going to set you up better than just kind of diving into something and trying to work out really hard. As a side note, when we just moved to Vegas a few months ago, for those who don't know me, and I didn't have any equipment with me other than my gymnast rings, which I kept in that blue bag in the back of our car. So I would get up at 6 every morning and just drive to the local park and throw them up. And I was able to basically do everything except carries, even though that's all that I had. And then I would just put them back in the back of the car until the next day. As far as carries went, I did have a weighted vest. So a couple of days a week, I would just go for a walk with my weighted vest, and that was my carry. So I still was able to do all 6 basic human movements, even though I didn't really have any facilities or equipment. So it's not so much training in a certain way. It's just kind of like learning how to train and then making the training apply to you individually, who you are, where you are, and what you want. So as far as cycles go, the easiest thing for most people to do is set up a monthly training cycle. It's very easy to say, oh, it's March, and in March, I'm going to do this. And then in April, I'm going to do this. And it may be that you're going in and out of different interests. So maybe you want to train for a 5K and you and your spouse are going to go do one in 5 or 6 weeks. So this month you're getting into your running plan. Great. Do that until you've met your goal. And then maybe you're only running because you want to do that one thing. Or maybe you fall in love with running and that becomes the thing that you do. Other people love to do lots of different things. Someone might invite them to go to yoga and they sign up for the unlimited month plan and they're like, I'm just going to do it every single day so that I can take advantage of the plan. And then they just kind of like, okay, I'm over that. And they're going to go to the next thing. But if you're just kind of a traditional, I'm going to go to the gym type of person who, wants to pursue that kind of fitness, going in with some kind of plan will probably serve you better than just showing up and doing whatever pops in your head at the day. And the reason for that is, especially if you're doing new things, like if you're going to the yoga studio, you probably don't know any of the moves. You don't know the sequence. You're going to be asking questions. You're going to be asking for help. Just like if you go to a new gym, there might be a lot of equipment there that you don't know how to use. Whether it's complicated or not, you might need someone to show you what to do. So kind of onboarding those skills is going to take you a few weeks. And then you're going to get into your groove. You're going to know what you're doing. Your plan is going to be kind of normal for you. That's when you're going to start making your progress and you're going to start to move forward. But then you're going to start to plateau. So those last couple of weeks, your kind of body and mind are both going to be like, okay, I've been doing this for a while. This is normal. And then you switch into your next month's plan, and that's when it all becomes new. Even if you're still going to the gym, even if you're still going to the yoga studio, you might have a different intention. You might have a different program, but having some kind of program, again, it's going to enable you to look back and say, based on where I was last month, am I fitter now? Or how has my fitness changed? And I know it's changed because I have a plan and I can chart my progress. was if you don't have any cycles or programs, you may not have any way to kind of, look back and see where you are and what progress you've made. So train to success. So this is another big difference between the kind of like strong first philosophy and something a little more like CrossFit. And I'm not picking on CrossFit, as my brother and I like to say, my karate appreciates your Taekwondo. I just don't study Taekwondo. So I think everything is valuable. It doesn't matter if you like to run and do cardio, or you lift weights and you don't do any cardio. Rather than kind of have this confrontational view of the opposition, I prefer to say, well, what can I learn from them that may benefit me regardless of whether I want to do that or not? And so Strong First has a thing they call luxurious rest. What do you call it? It doesn't matter what the last word is, sequences or what have you, periods, luxurious rest periods. Whereas CrossFit, they tend to time everything. And because CrossFit's goal is to have people do the most work. And the easiest way to measure that is in time. So it's, did you do it faster? Were you able to do more work with less rest? Or were you able to do more reps in the same amount of session, or more sets in the same amount of time? Whereas Strong First kind of looks at it and they say, we want you to recover completely, because Strong First is about being strong first. So if you're trying to do conditioning, you're doing conditioning. If you're doing strength work, then it's 3 to 5 minutes of rest in between each set. And when you first get into that, that sounds outrageous. You're like, I'm gonna train for 30 seconds and then rest for 3 to 5 minutes? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But Strong First's philosophy is, we want you to perform reps well, we want you to build the skill, and we want you to walk out feeling like you trained, but you feel great, as opposed to crawling out because you're exhausted and you're in a puddle on the floor because you're bathing in lactic acid because you literally worked out. And that's another thing I would challenge people to try is, Strong First taught me that we are training, we're learning, we're building a skill set so that we can know more, not only in the physical application of what we're doing, but in the skill set that we're learning. So it's kind of like being in class, as opposed to working yourself out. I worked out of fitness, I worked out of feeling comfortable, I worked out of looking recovered. If you're stumbling out of the gym and you feel sick and you need 2 days to recover, you probably worked out way too hard. If you're bouncing out of the gym feeling awesome and you can't wait to go back again, maybe you need to progress and train a little harder, or maybe you're putting in enough recovery and you're training at your level so that you're successfully increasing your fitness on a daily basis. And I'm happy to talk more about those kind of philosophies if anyone is interested. Closely related to that is building the skill. So last year I realized that I really wanted to do a handstand. I want to do a freestanding handstand, so I'm not leaning on anything. I've always wanted to do that. And I decided I was just going to commit to doing it. And so I kicked up against a wall and I tried to hold it for a minute. And once I got so I could do that, I said, I'm going to do that every day for a month. And it was a great challenge. But now that I'm going to a circus center and my instructor is in Cirque du Soleil, I realized I would have been much better served if I had just found someone to teach me how to do it properly. She literally said, did you teach yourself how to do this? And I said, yes. And she said, did you learn it off of YouTube? And I said, yes. And she said, don't do that. Because she had to unteach me what I spent 3 or 4 months learning to do. So now my defaults are all the things that she says the opposite of. So in this picture, for instance, if you look, you can see my hands are not in line, and they're also very wide. So learning how to put my hands in line, learning how to stack them under my shoulders, it took me a while because I defaulted to what I had spent many, many months, 1 minute every single day, learning how to do. So I had to break those habits. I had to learn how to not do the thing that I had taught myself to do. I also, I don't know if you can tell, but my back is really arched. And instead I had to learn how to not arch, but engage my core and put everything in line, as well as look at the ground, not look straight out. And partly this is a picture, so I was looking to make sure I was going to get the picture right. But all of those things could have been alleviated if I had just taken a class or hired someone that knew what they were doing. And they could teach me the skill first. And then I could put all the reps in. I could put all the training in afterwards. So I'd really encourage you, again, whether it's yoga weightlifting, CrossFit, whatever it might be, find a coach, find someone to teach you the skill, and then practice the skill. It's kind of like a house. You really want a good foundation. And then when you put a house on it, you're not going to have any problems. Well, as a homeowner, I can say you'll have lots of problems. But if you have a house on a bad foundation, you're going to keep fixing the house over and over and over. But it's not really the house. It's the fact that the foundation isn't good. So unless you address that foundation, you're going to continue to have problems with the house. So recovery, I chose this picture because it looks terrible. My wife and I had gone on this really long climb in Tuolumne, which is the northern Yosemite Park. You're above 10,000 feet the whole time. Oh, hi, Alexandra, I see you're joining us. That says connecting to audio. I don't know if she can hear us. But anyway, so I had this really arduous day. It was a long hike in, it was a big climb, and it was a long hike out. And I needed about a week to recover from that one day. So if you do the math, it's 7 or 8 days to recover from one day. That's a huge cost. So now I find that, I don't want to go spend a day doing something that costs me 7 or 8 days to recover. And I have learned how to offset that with sleep, relaxation, and time off. So again, if you're a busy professional, you have a startup, you have some big deal that you need to close or numbers you need to hit, you might be spending 10, 12, 14, 16 hours a day in the office. Or if you're an athlete and you're in competition, you might be at a race every weekend and you're traveling in between. So learning how to prioritize sleep is only going to pay dividends in the amount of performance you can have. And quite often people will kind of feel like, well, I'm going to stay up so I can get extra work done. But the longer you stay up, the lower your productivity will be. And you may find that, well, it took 4 hours to do 2 hours worth of work because you were distracted and you're tired and you're getting up and you're drinking more coffee and you're moving around to try and stay awake, or the words are blurring. Sometimes it will be better served if you just went to bed, maybe got up early after you were rested, and then you knocked it out because you're able to perform at a much higher level. So learning how to prioritize sleep has been one of the biggest lessons I can have for performance, both for my athletic endeavors as well as my business stuff. And again, relaxation is very closely related to that. In this instance, if you could see my buddy who took my picture, he was in the exact same position I had. We were coming down from a big wall climb, and we didn't want to take the energy to take the packs off because we'd have to put them back on again. So we just kind of hiked along until we found a rock we could kind of lean on. And we just took 5 or 10 minutes to relax. Now we had a long 5+ mile hike, several thousand feet down. So it was going to take us all day to hike out. So taking breaks in the midst of all this arduous activity enabled us to keep going for this long slog. And if we had just gone straight, we probably wouldn't have made it, and we would have had to then, have this big, huge rest. But even though our relaxation periods were short, just kind of like in a long day at the office, you might just take a coffee break. You might go out and just make a phone call, but taking those little breaks to kind of relieve that tension, shaking it off, resetting yourself will enable you to go more. And then hopefully at some point you can relax because you have a weekend or you have a week off or whatever. But again, in those small bursts, that will allow you to reset. And then, as I just mentioned, time off. Time off is different from relaxing. If you're in the gym, you want to relax after a heavy set by literally shaking the tension off of picking up the heavy weight. Maybe you walk across the gym, you get a drink of water, you come back, and then you do your next set. So you're relaxing, but you're doing it so that you can then go back into the next session of work. But time off, just like an athlete, they have an off season. You have preseason, your competition, postseason, and then you have your off season. In work, maybe it's your week off or your 2-week vacation or whatever it might be. But allowing yourself to rest physically, to mentally get out of the headspace that you're in, allows you to come back with a fresh perspective, allows you to come back with renewed energy. It's just a great thing to program into, again, both your athletic endeavors as well as your professional ones. So to just kind of review all the things we talked about today, You got fitness. This is the current program I'm doing, which is Pavel's new book, The Quick and the Dead. So fitness is subjective, relative, individual, fluid, and endless. Again, I would encourage all of you to kind of think of fitness as an evolving thing and have it be kind of more punctuated by individual goals and who you are, where you are, what you want to pursue, as opposed to these external, other people, whether they're celebrities, fitness people, professional athletes, something like that. The 6 basic human movements are the push, the pull, the squat, the hinge, the carry, and the rotation. I'm hearing some kind of knocking. Can we just have everyone double check that they're muted if they're not talking? Thank you. Sorry, it's just distracting. So this is an example. This is a body weight squat known as the hack squat. So again, this is not a power movement, but it's a lot of mobility and balance. So fitness doesn't have to look like a certain way. I can still do a squat even if I'm not in the gym. These are, again, basic human movements that are involved in all sport and kind of athletic endeavors, as well as also like in our daily lives. We're quite often doing a lot of these things without even knowing it, and learning how to kind of do them mindfully and learning how to do them in a good way that won't injure you may serve you for longevity, as well as helping you to do them better. And then lastly, we talked about having cycles and having a plan or some kind of a program. Again, the easiest thing for most people to do is think in things as terms of like a monthly cycle, for instance, training to success as opposed to training to failure. So again, walking out of the gym feeling great as opposed to crawling out of the gym feeling like you hurt yourself. And then you may do well to build the skill first, hiring someone or finding someone who's an expert or who knows what they're doing, and they can kind of teach you the right way as opposed to just kind of diving in and figuring out as you go along. It will not only set you up to advance much more quickly, but also it'll alleviate a lot of the risk of injury or overdoing stuff. As far as recovery, sleep, relaxation, and time off. This is a picture of my wife and I went to Red Rocks. It was really windy, so we were going to go for a hike, and instead we just kind of drove around and enjoyed the view. And that was on a Sunday, so we had slept in and had brunch. So we were able to kind of like hit all 3 of those in one. It was a nice way to kind of recover and reset for the upcoming week. So even though we didn't really go anywhere or do anything, we did have a nice set of sleep, relaxation, and time off all in one.